Welcome to the Engage and Empower podcast. Behind every successful company is an intentional and innovative approach to empowering your most valuable asset, your people. Join me in having conversations with people and talent leaders as we share our journeys and unpack what it takes to build strong, cohesive teams and employee experiences. From executives at early-stage startups to innovators at large public companies, we'll capture the compelling stories of the people behind people teams. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Engage and Empower podcast. I'm your host, Rasika Rajagopalan, and today I am really excited to be chatting with the founder and CEO of AllVoices, Claire Schmidt. Claire, you've been doing some really great work, and I'm excited to learn more about you and AllVoices today. So thank you so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Love it. I'm, really excited to jump in. So tell us a little bit about your background to get us started and what inspired you to found AllVoices. Tell us a little bit about your product.
Yeah, my background is at the intersection of technology and social good. So that's what I've been doing for my entire career. And most recently, I was vice president of technology and innovation at 20th Century Fox. And while I was there, I read Susan Fowler's blog post about her experience at Uber. And at the time, my job was really focused on improving systems and processes at Fox from a technology perspective. And so my mind immediately went to, why are we asking employees to engage in this seemingly very broken system for reporting workplace issues, when there is a possibility that technology could potentially play a role in helping employees do so in a more comfortable and safe way? And that might have the effect of encouraging more employees to speak up. So to me, it seemed like a win-win. And that's how I went down the path of researching AllVoices and researching the need in the market and whether people would use it. And I got pretty hooked. I got very excited and decided to leave my job and start the company.
Wow. Really inspiring story and incredibly important work that you're doing, for sure. So what have you learned through your product? Have companies found that they're hearing about more issues, or what types of things are companies finding are more likely not to be escalated directly? Have you learned more about why employees are using AllVoices in particular?
Yeah. When we started off, we just had a harassment, bias, and discrimination module. So all of the issues that employees were reporting initially were around those topics. And that's really important. And I think it's very difficult for people to report those things directly sometimes. And in fact, EEOC data suggests that 75% of people who experience harassment in the workplace never report it. So filling that gap was incredibly important to us. But what was really interesting was that over time, people started using AllVoices to report other types of issues outside of that kind of focus area. So they were reporting culture issues, and they were giving feedback, and they were asking questions. And we very quickly realized people want safe ways of speaking up about all different types of topics. And they want a platform that supports them in doing that and gives them a safe space to do that. So we quickly expanded our product to include, now we have 6 modules. So diversity, equity, and inclusion, general feedback and questions, the harassment and bias module that we originally launched with, ethics and compliance, and culture feedback. And then our 6th was actually a COVID-19 module, because for the same reason, people were starting to speak up about health and safety concerns, challenges with remote work. And so we felt there was a need to really kind of dig into that a little bit more.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I love with AllVoices is that the design is really easy to use. And, of course, it feels modern, a lot more modern than a lot of the traditional hotline services out there. But also, to your point, there's both the culture and the harassment feedback that you can provide. There's the COVID-19 feedback. And so really, you can do pulses through it. So it doesn't feel like it's this removed product or some type of isolated hotline. It brings all of these pieces together. I also love that you can respond directly through your product, right? Your CEO or your people leader can respond, which I think brings a new level of value and cohesiveness to these conversations, which is something distinctly different from other tools available out there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we wanted every report or piece of feedback to spark a conversation. because everybody's looking for something different. I mean, you asked why people wanted to use AllVoices to report these different types of issues. And it's really interesting. Some of them are using it because they do fear retaliation. Others just don't know if what they're going through is even worth taking up someone's time with. And they're worried about someone telling them like, this isn't a big deal, or you shouldn't talk to me about this or something. So there's all different kinds of reasons. But what's great is they can stay anonymous as long as they want during that conversation, that back and forth conversation that happens after they submit their report. And I think what's really helpful is that companies are not just using that to say, thank you for sharing. They're actually digging in, getting more information, providing coaching, providing resources, support. So it's really flexible for them to use in the way that they see fit once they receive the feedback or the report.
Yeah, totally. What's your advice for, companies around finding the right balance between trust and, investing in relationships that you're building on the people team, and then balancing that with offering some of these anonymous channels? Because I imagine, if you're seeing a ton of traffic around feedback through AllVoices that's not being, brought through directly to your people team, then perhaps it's also highlighting a different issue. And so how can people teams think about, the right balance between these anonymous platforms and then kind of cultivating relationships where they're able to get this feedback more directly?
Yeah, it's a great question. We really recommend that when companies are rolling out AllVoices, they make it very clear that this is just one channel to speak up about things. And there are always other channels, including speaking to someone in person, whether it's HR or manager or some other company leader. And I think what's important about that is that employees feel like, okay, I'm being encouraged to come speak to someone directly if I want to, but I also have this other option. And that actually makes them feel more trust in their leadership, because it's sort of, the opposite of that would be just saying, if you don't come talk to us, then there's nothing we can do, And so wanting to create a safe space for employees to speak up, no matter who they are or what they're going through, that works for the employee and not just for the company, I think engenders a lot of trust with employees. And, we've had a lot of people tell us, HR leaders especially tell us, the day they rolled out AllVoices, they actually had people come up to them directly, not anonymously, and say, thank you so much for doing this. Like, I don't need this right now, but it's so comforting to know that I could use it if I needed to.
Right, right. And I think to your earlier point, because you do have this feature where your leaders are able to communicate directly, it is distinctly different than any other survey that kind of goes into a box that's then responded to in aggregate. You do have that opportunity to continue to have the direct conversation, which may, open up the door to somebody feeling more comfortable coming directly to someone because they've had the conversation before, maybe just not in a way where they were identified. How would you say the distributed nature of work has affected your product at all? Did you start before or after the pandemic? And how has that kind of affected the way you've thought about, iterating on the experience you delivered through your tool?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, so we launched AllVoices in the middle of 2018. So we were definitely up and running for a while pre-pandemic and got to see kind of the use cases and what was working and what wasn't. And I think what happened in 2020 is that we were all under very new circumstances and very stressful circumstances. We were all more isolated than ever before. There's a lot of people who are working remotely. And at the same time, the people who are being asked to come into work are suddenly having to risk their lives, which was not the case before. So I think everything just got really heightened during 2020. And what we were seeing was increased usage, dramatically increased usage of the platform, and a lot more variety in terms of the things that were being raised through it. And I think that's because you can't just walk into someone's office if you're all working remotely and casually, sit down and just tell them like, I've had something on my mind. And, leadership told us like, we don't feel like we have a pulse on what's happening with our employees. And the only way we're really getting the true story, kind of the vibe check, is by reading the reports that we're getting on AllVoices. And a lot of companies actually ramped up their use of the tool and started using the pulse surveys where they hadn't before, or started using AllVoices to collect all hands questions because everyone was remote. And it's sometimes harder to ask questions virtually as yourself than maybe you would feel when you're all in the same room together, and it feels a little bit more secure. So what we've seen is basically more of a need for the tool and more usage of the platform in general.
Yeah, definitely. Kind of alongside alongside that remote work question, what other education and enablement around harassment and workplace well-being do you generally recommend companies invest in alongside AllVoices? Like what works and, how can companies be thinking about this as more and more companies transition remote? Like, does the enablement look and feel different for a virtual company than it does for an in-person company? Are the issues that you're starting to see vary from one setup to another? Like, how can companies be thinking about enablement alongside these platforms?
Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting is we originally thought, maybe we'll provide training and maybe we'll provide support on kind of the back end as well. But what we saw as we kind of dived into this space is that there's a number of great companies and individuals actually, or kind of smaller companies out there doing amazing training work. So instead, we've partnered with a bunch of them. So what's really great about like kind of that division of labor is that they can start to get a sense as they start to get data and they start to see where are blind spots, like where are people speaking up about issues that they're having. So our customer success team can say, hey, what issues have you been hearing about a lot lately? Or, what's being flagged for you in the dashboard as kind of something you need to focus on. And the companies that we work with will tell them. And then we say, oh, we actually have a partner who does unconscious bias training. We have a partner who does harassment training. Have you thought about putting an anti-retaliation policy in your handbook, or do you already have one? If you already have one, have you communicated that to people? So there's a lot of ways in which we're kind of brainstorming and working through solutions with our customers as they start to surface insights. And a lot of that actually does mean connecting them with other organizations or individuals who can help them resolve the issues if they don't have those in place.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's helpful that you're able to partner with organizations to take insights to action, because data is great, but it's not, it's just kind of a nice to know if you don't have sort of a game plan that comes out of it. I guess kind of going off again of that remote company piece, like through the pandemic, did you see a shift in the types of themes that emerged from the data that you were collecting? Because I'm sure there are different stressors and different circumstances of being, in a company among other people that can lead to circumstances of harassment that, you're in a kind of totally different setup in a virtual environment. Did you see any shift there in some of the things that you were seeing? And like, what would you encourage people, teams to be, educating and focusing on in terms of building awareness as they move remote?
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that we started hearing right away was that some of the, inappropriate, like kind of in-person interactions obviously weren't happening as much and weren't being reported about as much, which is a great benefit, I guess, of having all your employees remote, is that they can't touch each other in inappropriate ways. But what we heard starting to replace that was people feeling a little bit more comfortable saying inappropriate things on work channels. So Slack was an example. I think there's this idea that if you're behind your screen, you don't have to act quite as well behaved as you do in person. And there was actually a New York Times piece about exactly this phenomenon. So it was interesting that it echoed what we were hearing from our customers. So there was definitely, and then the other thing we heard was in terms of like people interrupting each other, I think that was happening more than normal on Zoom because it's harder to pick up on those in-person cues. So it's not always, this person is just behaving badly. It's like this system is maybe not set up for the most kind of equitable outcome for everyone involved. So I think, companies and company leaders have been trying to think about policies, ways to make meetings run more smoothly or make sure that everyone has a turn speaking, even in a virtual environment. Thinking about adding to their policies around like what's acceptable behavior on digital platforms and making sure that employees are aware of what's acceptable and what's not acceptable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's interesting that you were able to see those distinctions. And I can definitely see like there are different types of bias that can creep up through a virtual environment. There's different types of ways that, actions can be received. There's different types of education that I think is important to share. And those insights drive a lot of that, which is really interesting. Switching gears a little bit, I'm sure starting your own company is no easy task. And I'm always so impressed and inspired by founders that see such a need and are able to really build off of that. And so how did you maintain a sense of resilience as you navigated each hurdle? Was there a particularly challenging or trying moment for you? Like, what has the journey been so far, and how have you kind of managed the ups and downs?
Yeah, I mean, from the very beginning, it was a hard decision for me to leave and start this company. I never had the goal of becoming an entrepreneur. That was not something on my bucket list. And I really liked my job at Fox and I liked my team. And what was interesting was I just became kind of obsessed with this topic and with trying to solve this problem. And, I would do my work from 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever. And then I would go home and I would like research this and I would like research EEOC stats and I would look up like how culture surveys worked to try to figure out if they were solving this problem. And I would talk to everyone who would talk to me about it. And so what happened was just it became more and more impossible for me to not do this. So that was kind of the beginning. And then since then, like I've definitely had hard moments. I've had hard days, but I've never felt like this isn't worth doing. This product doesn't need to exist in the world. Like I've always been so driven by seeing it out in the world, seeing how it's being used. And my goal, which is to make this available to every employee in the world. That's my goal. That's my North Star. So until I'm there, I don't think I will feel fully satisfied or feel, even any desire to give up.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you have that passion fueled by this broader mission that, you're serving, I'm sure that's incredibly motivating and, gives you that energy and drive as you kind of navigate each stage of growth. Is there anything that, any sort of focus area that you've had as you've built your own company, kind of knowing a lot of what you've learned around culture, knowing a lot of what you've learned through the data that you've seen come through from the various customers that you serve? Like, is there anything you've focused on intentionally as you're building, your own company from the ground up?
Yes. I mean, you have to start thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion from day one. From the very first hire I made, that was always something that was on my mind. And it's something that has to be prioritized. It doesn't just happen naturally, even if you are literally running a company that is focusing on that topic. Healthy company culture doesn't happen naturally. So there needs to be a lot of communication, a lot of transparency. And I think the biggest thing that we kind of preach and practice as a company is listening. I think that is the number one thing you can do as a leader. That is the number one thing you should do even as a company with your employees. And so that's why obviously I've built this listening product because I believe that so strongly, but also really try to do that in our company's sort of day to day. And I can give you an example. We had been having, multiple all hands meetings since the pandemic, all virtual. And they were just getting kind of stale. Like it was the same format. It was the same experience every single, week after week. And one of our employees was like, she just sent me an email late one night and she was like, hey, I think we need to mix it up. And I would imagine that's kind of hard. We also use our tool so people can raise things to me through like our surveys and through our reporting tool. But she was comfortable sending that to me directly. And I think it would have been really easy to be like, yeah, like we'll do that sometime, or like things are so busy right now. But instead, we worked with her to come up with kind of a plan to change those Friday all hands meetings. And now what we do is that every employee gets to take turns leading it and they get to do whatever they want for that half hour. So we've had like someone come in and lead a meditation. We had like a gratitude circle, I think it's called, last week, and everyone was like tearing up. So I think when you listen, you open up like so much opportunity for your company to get better. And that's what you want anyway. So that's my soapbox, is just listen to your employees and make sure there's a bunch of different ways that they can tell you what they're thinking. Because a lot of times it's not just about, I'm feeling uncomfortable. Sometimes it's like, I have this great positive idea that I want to implement here.
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly empowering. And I think you've really brought the concept of all voices to life right there. You have all voices captured now in your all hands. That comes from a voice that, came directly to you. And I think we do the best that we can to hire the best and brightest people. And if we aren't able to, empower them and enable them to have a voice, then we're doing our own organization a huge disservice, which ultimately impacts our broader mission. And so love the approach that you've taken there. What's your advice to other aspiring entrepreneurs? Like, is there anything that you wish you had known from the beginning or anything you've learned along the way you'd like to share?
I mean, there's so many things I've learned. And I do try to talk to people who are thinking of starting companies or who are earlier in their journey, because I think one of the most helpful things for me is I actually had friends who had started companies. And that was part of why I didn't want to start a company. I had seen it up close and I had seen it's not glamorous. It's not it is a real grind. And you are doing kind of the work that either no one else can do or no one else wants to do. And that's kind of what has characterized the early days is I want to give these people jobs that they're excited about, that they can jump in and own. And then I'm going to take all the scraps that are left over and also add fundraising to that pile and just do that stuff. So I had seen that up close and personal. So I think talking to other people who are thinking about starting companies and letting them in on what the experience is really like has been one thing that I've enjoyed doing. And my advice is just don't start a company unless you are so passionate about it. Don't start a company just to start one. Start it because it's something you can't get off your mind and you're thinking about it all the time. And you realize there's no way you can continue with your normal life unless you do this, because there will be times when it's really hard. And I think you need that passion and belief in kind of the future idea of the world to carry you through.
Yeah, 100%. I think that mindset is also, I'm sure, what gives a lot of great founders humility of being open to listening, because it's really about serving this larger purpose. And I think when you go into that with that mindset, I'm sure that opens the door to, that type of leadership. And so, yeah, that's great advice. Where can people go to learn more about AllVoices?
So you can go to our website at allvoices.co. Part of our mission is to make it so that even if your company hasn't signed up yet to use AllVoices, you can still use it as an employee. So you can actually go there and report an issue or share feedback with your company, and we will pass that along to your company completely free of charge and give the company leader of your choosing access to that report. So I would encourage, if you're feeling like you're struggling with something at work and you don't know who to talk to about it, to check out AllVoices and learn more about how it works. And then we're also on social media. We have a blog, we have a Twitter, Instagram, everything like that.
Yeah, that's super cool. How many people have gone in directly without their company's sponsorship and submitted reports? Are you seeing a lot of activity there?
Yeah, I think thousands at this point. And sometimes I think what's really interesting is that no matter what, those people are getting their voices heard. We are passing the reports along no matter what. I think sometimes there are outcomes that the employee is really happy with, sometimes not. But I think at least that's a good starting point, especially if you think about all the people who don't even have HR, for example, in their companies. Maybe it's an actor who had an experience on an audition. We pass those along as well.
Yeah. Great. Well, Claire, I really appreciate you taking time to come on the show. It's always, again, super inspiring to hear stories of entrepreneurs taking the leap to co-found their own ventures and learn more about how they've navigated that, as well as just hear so much more about this mission that you're building towards. I love the work that you're doing and really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. So nice to talk to you today.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to hear more stories like this, please subscribe for the weekly drop and feel free to share around with your people and talent colleagues. I'd love your feedback, so please leave a review and let us know what you enjoyed and what types of topics you'd like to see covered in the future. The more reviews and subscribers we get, the more quality content we can consistently deliver to you. If you're interested in being on the podcast, feel free to reach out to me at russica@engageandempower.org. See you next week.